Episode 101 this week, episode 1 of season 2 of The Next Generation. Boy, howdy, was it a train wreck. Pretty much a train wreck. Massive changes as we go into this episode. Dr. Crusher moved on to Starfleet Medical, so Dr. Pulaski was transferred to the Enterprise to be Chief Medical Officer. Wesley Crusher still on board the Enterprise. They didn't ever fully explain why he was still on board, but he was. Then Geordi LaForge, who was the navigator, suddenly chief engineer. He didn't even work in engineering at all in season 1, but they promote him to chief engineer. Made zero sense. None at all. But in this one, the Enterprise is picking up Dr. Pulaski. She's shuttled over to the Enterprise. They didn't explain it in this episode. They will in future ones. But shuttlecraft brought her over. And the Enterprise is supposed to be taking live samples of a virus to a planet that has an outbreak of some sort of disease. They need these samples to get the medication, apparently. But these samples are hugely dangerous, and the least dangerous of them, if it were to get out, could wipe out the entire ship within days, they say. Well, the Enterprise is tasked with doing that. LaForge came up with containers that would work. The person on the starbase that's transferring it demands that he account for all the safety protocols and everything. And Picard's like, well, we want to inspect all the samples. He's like, fine. And Picard's like, fine. And then they inspect everything, and it's taken them a long time to do that. But on the ship, Wesley Crusher is like all melancholy. He doesn't really want to leave. He runs into Picard, and Picard's like, yeah, well, you got to go see your mother, I guess, and stay with her. And he's like, yeah, I guess, but at least now I can finish up my school assignments before I go. And Picard's like, yeah, whatever. Then Picard wants to see Dr. Pulaski. But before he gets to that, there's like a big ball of light that passes into the ship, moves around the ship, goes under Counselor Troi's covers when she's in Betty by, and then Counselor Troi sits up and has this weird expression. So when Picard goes to see Pulaski, she's in 10 forward, and Picard's exasperated. He's like, she can't find her way to meet the captain, but she finds 10 forward. 10 forward, also a brand new thing in the ship. They retcon it, said it had always been there, but it's basically a bar where they can go after hours. Civilian barkeepers and servers and so forth. So Picard gets there, and Guinan, who is the barkeeper, points out Pulaski. Picard goes over there, and she's like, sit down, you got to hear this. And essentially Troi has become pregnant, and it's a unnaturally rapid pregnancy where the baby's growing like within days when it should take months. Picard calls a senior staff meeting. He's telling the staff what happened. Riker's incredulous. He demands to know who the father is. He's more jealous than anything. Worf wants to kill it now. And Troy's like, well, I'm going to have the baby, so that's that. And Picard's like, well, that's that, I guess. And so she's allowed to progress with the pregnancy. She has the baby. And Data was the midwife or whatever it's supposed to be. He's helping her. Pulaski delivers it. There's no pain, no sign of trauma within minutes afterwards. Pulaski can't figure it out. Picard goes to see the baby to kind of get a feel if there's any danger. And the baby's like 5 years old at that point. Picard's like, this is weird. Deanna Troi is acting like it's the most normal thing in the world, even though she had a baby the day before and now the baby's 5. She acts like it's perfectly natural. But eventually one of these samples breaks loose, and they're like, oh no, the sample's getting out of here. What are we going to do? This is terrible. and they figure out that there's some form of radiation that is responsible for the sample getting out, and then Counselor Troy's baby like, oh, it's me, I'm the problem, I gotta go. And she's like, what do you mean you gotta go? And he's like, bye. And she's like, no. And she calls for Pulaski, who comes with the captain, and Troy's baby dies. They figured out it was a form of energy, and it was curious, so it somehow manifested into a pregnancy in Troy and was trying to live the human experience to learn more about humans and apparently Beta Zeds. So the sample didn't destroy the whole ship, everything was fine, and the people on the planet got their medication, and the whole thing was alright, except for, they had the dead boy. But Troy never really mentioned it again after that, so she must have been fine. Some interesting notes in this one. There were a bunch. Pulaski, played by Diana Mulder, who had been in the original series in a couple of guest starring spots. She was brought in because they fired Gates McFadden, who played Dr. Crusher. They weren't happy with her work, even though they would bring her back the following season. Pulaski was basically a female version of Bones because they thought the captain should have like the older person to go to when he has problems or issues. But then they had Guinan, the barkeeper, and she basically filled that exact same role with a different position on the ship. So Pulaski never truly worked out very well. Guinan, played by Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg called the producers of the show and said, hey, I'd love to be on your TV show if you would have me. And they were like, are you serious? And she said, yeah, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, I would love to be part. And so they wrote her in a recurring character, so when she was doing a movie, it wasn't vital that she be in every episode, but they could bring her on as often as she was available to them. Jonathan Frakes, who played Commander Riker, had grown a beard in the off-season, showed up with the intent of shaving it after the first few rehearsals, but the producer said, no, keep that for the whole rest of the series, that's great, so he did that. LaForge, like I said, got promoted to chief engineer primarily because they had that revolving door engineer status, and people wanted a full-time chief engineer because it helped the plot along better if there was like one character in charge of engineering instead of one guy every week. So that was that. Will Wheaton, oh, I forgot to mention his character, Wesley Crusher, allowed to stay on the Enterprise, and they did a funny ha-ha at the end where Picard said, who will be in charge of his studies? Who will tuck him in at night? And Worf's like, I'll take that responsibility. So Will Wheaton stayed on the ship. His character, Wesley anyway, they just explained that he wanted to stay on the ship and continue as an acting ensign to get experience, and his mom was totally fine with that for reasons. They never explained why she said, sure, to keep my teenage son on this starship that's going into dangerous places and I'm not around. They didn't flesh that out. This script, also a rehash of a script due to the writer's strike from Phase 2, which was a Star Trek series in the 70s that started production and then got scrapped. They had the script laying around, so they used it because of the strike, so they were able to get an episode in that they normally wouldn't have been able to do. Wasn't the greatest script, but they got it. So pretty much 101.